Hello friends, my name is Marinés, and today I'll be talking about the next batch of books that I read. Book number 10 was Battle Angel Alita by Yukito Kishiro, translated by Fred Burke, Sterling Bell, and Matt Thorne. I'm also jumping ahead chronologically, like my reading chronology, because I read volume 2 of this manga a few weeks later, so I'm counting that as book 11. This is a manga about a cybernetic doctor who finds the head of a cyborg in a trash pile, and basically he saves her, names her Alita. Alita has no memory of her past and basically has to navigate her way through living in this world, which is a futuristic world and also post-apocalyptic. It's kind of like a salvage city on the earth, and above them is a floating city that is much better off, but none of the earth people are allowed on the floating city. There are a lot of other world building elements here, but that's kind of the basics. I picked this up after seeing Alita Battle Angel in theaters. I went into that movie having pretty low to no expectations, and I was super surprised by how much I enjoyed it from an entertainment perspective. There was almost too much story in that movie, and the love interest was an absolute dud, so were definitely things that were not great, but from an entertainment perspective, it definitely entertained me way more than I was expecting, and it had a pretty good performance by the actress who was playing Alita. We talked about this movie on an episode of Snark Squad Pod with our guest Tobin Addington from the podcast The Contenders. So if you want to hear more about my thoughts on the movie, I will link that episode of the podcast down in the description. Anyway, I went to watch that movie with my best friend, and about halfway through the movie, she leaned over to me and said that she could tell that the movie was adapted from something. She wasn't sure what, and I only had like a vague memory of it being a manga. So it piqued my interest to kind of look into that, and when I got home, I got the first 2 volumes and I ended up reading through them. Each medium was better for that medium strength. So the movie obviously did a lot better at conveying the action. The manga had more room to let the plot breathe. In the manga, I enjoyed the character development. I liked the character art, and the relationship between Alita and Ito is really one of my favorite things that kind of anchors the story. That said, I found myself like having to go back and look at frames and like really like look closely to try and track the action in the art, in the drawing. It just didn't, something about it muddled a lot of the action for me. Volumes 1 and 2 include bits of the stories that are in the movie, so I was reading about things like kind of already knew. So I'm looking forward to continuing with the series and kind of dipping into parts of Alita's story that I don't know yet. I gave both of these volumes 4 out of 5 stars. Book number 12 was American Gods by Neil Gaiman. Around the time that I started BookTube, I went on a Neil Gaiman spree. I read Coraline, Stardust, The Graveyard Book, The Ocean at the End of the Lane, The Sleeper and the Spindle, and then I moved on to Neverwhere, and I read a couple of chapters and I put it aside, and then I lost steam on my Gaiman spree. And then for no reason that I can really describe to you, I decided to pick up American Gods this year. This is a fantasy story about a man named Shadow Moon who's released from prison a few days early after he receives the news that his wife and best friend were killed in a car crash. Sort of unmoored by this turn of events, he receives a job offer from a mysterious man named Mr. Wednesday, and he decides to take him up and ends up being like his bodyguard and do-boy basically. They go on a road trip of sorts, on a journey of sorts, and throughout this, Shadow discovers more about who Mr. Wednesday really is, and that there is more to the world than he ever knew really existed. I knew that I loved this book after I finished reading it, but it has stayed with me and in my feelings so much after I finished reading. I picked up the book for myself and just because I wanted to, and I don't know, probably another like library scroll or something, but afterwards I was like, oh, there's a TV adaptation. It was before season 2 started, so I was like, I'll watch it. And then I asked Nicole if we could do a podcast episode about it. So there is a podcast episode about the first season of American Gods. It is with Amanda McLaughlin from the Spirits podcast, so I will link that in the description as well. If you want to hear us talk about the TV show, we do talk a lot about it as an adaptation and the way that it fleshes out some of the characters in the world building. As for the book, I would have probably rated it 5 stars on feelings alone, but it does have some weaker areas. Some of the gods that this book mentions feel a little dated, and some of the concepts that they're based on feel dated. It is a very symbolic story, and sometimes those symbols felt nuanced and they felt like they connected with me, and sometimes they felt a little overly simplistic or shallow. Additionally, this book does not treat its female characters particularly well, so yes, I can stand back and see some of the weaker points here. That said, I love journey books, and I was not prepared for how much of a journey book this was. This book wanders and meanders in a way that I can see other readers getting frustrated by, but it really did it so at a pace that I enjoyed. There is a climax that the book tells you right up front that we're building towards. Mr. Wednesday is gathering allies for something, so we know that we're gonna get there, but there are a lot of pit stops along the way, and a lot of times Shadow is alone, or he's thinking about things or discovering things, and those pit stops might be bad if you're somebody who's reading for that climax, but I enjoyed kind of getting there the long way. I enjoyed Shadow as a main character, and that might also be a crapshoot for readers because he is a very stoic character. It's part of his personality, but also it's part of him dealing with everything that has happened since he's been released from prison, and it's probably also because of his time spent in prison. A lot of times it almost feels like Shadow is being carried along by the plot, and he's probably more accepting of the things that he faces than any of us would be. I found that endearing though. I found his stoicism endearing, and I felt like it fit him, like he was the exact right person to be in the story because of that, and anybody else would have like cut and run. I found that perspective too, his perspective of kind of like taking everything as it came, gave the story overall a very dreamlike quality. This is a very theme heavy story, and it says a lot about American values and about history and about the way that the history of America is built on the traditions of immigrants. It's a story that had me constantly thinking whether or not I agreed with the underlying hot take. I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. The next 3 books are romance books that I picked specifically for a video on Read Bliss's channel. I mentioned recently that I am making videos for Read Bliss, which is a channel that is specifically focused on romance. This is a paid participation, but it is publisher agnostic, which means that I can pick any books that I want to feature in a video. Like that choice is mine. My first video was all about slow burn romances. Book number 13 was 99% Mine by Sally Thorne. Last year I read The Hating Game, which I believe was her debut, and it had a lot of hype on BookTube, and I also enjoyed it. I just didn't think it was like the best thing ever. It was very entertaining to read while I was reading it. It hit all of the like satisfying tropes that I wanted. I picked it up during a time when I was very slumpy, and I just like blew through that story, so it was very good for that time in that moment. Like, I enjoyed it. I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars, but I just didn't go crazy over it like other people I had seen. So it was really interesting to me when I started to hear the first reviews of 99% Mine that people were saying it was so much worse than The Hating Game, or they didn't like it as much. And I thought that was interesting because I liked The Hating Game, but I didn't like love The Hating Game. Some of that initial buzz and some of those early reviews were particularly harsh on the main character in the story. In 99% Mine, Darcy and her twin brother inherit a rundown cottage from her grandmother who has passed away, and they hire their childhood friend Tom to kind of help them restore it. Tom once declared his love for Darcy when they were young, when they were 18, and she basically runs away from him, and now that she's back, Tom is now engaged, but the feelings that existed between them are still there. I thought this was just as good as The Hating Game, predictable in all of the right ways, easy to read, and very entertaining. I actually like the background characters in this book more. I can't even remember any of the background characters in The Hating Game, but this had some really memorable supporting characters, and I really liked a lot of the quirks of the story. So you have like a dead tarot reading grandma, you have like this grouchy construction worker that becomes her muse. Her best friend is phenomenal. We only see her a couple times, but she's great, and she makes these underwear with like swear words on them. So it had a lot of quirks that made it more memorable to me. If Darcy is called unlikable, I think that that's a little bit unfair. She is a rough around the edges character, and it is in a way that is very performative, and I feel like that you feel that as a reader, but that's kind of the point. Darcy has a heart condition, she has an illness, and she doesn't take very good care of herself because she is afraid to kind of face this. She puts on that exterior of being like a badass and being a hard ass because she is avoiding dealing with this chronic illness, and she hates the way that people treat her like the chronic illness is a weakness, so she almost overperforms that strength. We also then have to see that the main love interest kind of does this overprotective thing and tries to like take care of her because of this, and so they have to kind of contend with that as well. The underlying theme of the book really comes down to the fact that people aren't perfect, but people can be perfect for each other. And in this book, the two main characters already know and love each other, so it's a different kind of build than in the Hating Game, where you see that relationship develop and it goes from hate to love basically. Here there are other factors to deal with. A lot of them are exterior, or a lot of them are like them realizing or coming, so it's not the same kind of story, it's not the same relationship building. Like I said, I enjoyed it just as much as the Hating Game, and I also gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars. Book number 14 was Wanna Bet by Talia Hibbert. This story is about a woman who has to move in with her best friend, her college best friend, after her apartment gets flooded. And her best friend, he has always been in love with her, but once they first met, she made it very clear that it was either going to be a friendship or a sexual relationship, not both, and he chose friendship. He didn't want to lose her as a friend. Of course, all of those feelings are confronted once they are living in close quarters. I really enjoyed this. I thought this book did a great job of showing us the development of their friendship and making us believe the things that were keeping them apart in the present, even if a lot of those things were internal, like feelings and history and things that each character had to confront in order for them to come together. My favorite part of the story though was that the guy had like been in love with her for this entire time, and this story actually takes a moment to discuss how weird that is. And not like weird, but just like the ways that this thing that we usually see as very romantic, like that one-sided unrequited love, had almost like stopped his development as a full and complete person. I don't think I've ever seen a book really take a moment to be like, okay, you've been obsessing about this for years now when you could have been like improving yourself or moving on or any of these things. And this book didn't put all of the onus on her doorstep, like that she wasn't ready for a relationship. It also said, but hey, like you've done this to yourself in the way that you haven't done anything else with this time. So I loved that they both had work to do as characters before they really came together in a relationship, and I ended up giving this 4 out of 5 stars. Book number 15 was Act Like It by Lucy Parker. This story is about two West End actors who have to fake date, basically because he has a really bad reputation with the media and she's like the darling of the press, and so they decide to, well, their managers and stuff decide that they should fake date to help improve his reputation. Like fake dating, if you love fake dating, this has fake dating in it. Also, this didn't feel like the gross hate to love, the kind that I don't like. It was more like he was like a grumpy character rather than like an abusive one or anything like that. It wasn't like he was so bad that you were like, why would anybody fall in love with that guy? Like, you saw the chemistry and they had really great banter and interactions. In this one, I particularly liked the conflict at the end, even though it was kind of an instance of not using their words. The main character is amazing in this though, because that like touch of like not communicating properly shows up, but she really asserts herself and is like, no, this is what it is. This is what's gonna happen. Here's how I'm gonna act, and you need to get yourself together. And seeing that again, reaction is not something that you see a lot of times. Usually like nobody uses their words and they go in separate directions, and some chance later kind of brings them together, but she was immediately like, no, like you're gonna listen. It was just so great. I love that part of the story. It elevated the whole thing for me because it sticks out so much in my memory, so I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. That's it for me today. If you have read or would like to read any of the books I mentioned, let's chat down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys soon. I never know what my lighting is doing. What is my lighting doing? I have to hold up 2 lonely books because the rest were ebooks.